Good afternoon. We'll be serving meals shortly. Would you like anything specific? Ma'am? The flight attendant asked with a polite smile. Yes, can I have a blanket? And a bottle of water, please. The attendant smiled and noted her request, then glanced at Jungkook, who was lost in his own world. He already had headphones on and completely immersed in the movie playing on the small screen in front of him. She sighed, giving him a small nudge to get his attention. Hey, do you want anything? Jungkook blinked, pulled off one ear of his headphones, and turned to her. What? Do you need something? Snacks or drink, she repeated, raising an eyebrow. He glanced at the girl standing holding a notepad. No, thanks, he said, then went right back to his movie. She rolled her eyes, knowing he was going to be like this. After a whole got her blanket and water, she adjusted the blanket over her lap, feeling a bit more comfortable now. She took a sip of water and glanced over at her own screen, deciding to browse through the movie selection. After a few minutes, she couldn't ignore the urge to look out the window. The thought of watching the city lights and clouds felt more enticing than watching a movie. But there was a huge barrier named Jungkook. She turned to her husband again, tugging lightly on his sleeve. He paused his movie, eyes shifting to her. What now? Can we switch seats? She asked hopefully. Why? I'm comfortable, he raised an eyebrow. I want to look outside. Jungkook, you are fine there. He said, dismissing her, turning his attention back to that screen. We are literally sitting on this plane for 10 hours or more. I'm tired. And you're not even using the window. Jungkook, you can look outside when we are returning back to Seoul. But I want to look outside now. Jungkook, there's nothing except for boring clouds. You will live. He said, sighing, and her lips pressed in thin line. Sometimes she thinks he does it purposely just to rile her up, to see how far can she maintain her composure before she burst out at him. She doesn't really get angry at him, maybe she did 1 or 2 times since they got married. Because first, they don't talk much, and if they do, he purposely tests her limit. Jungkook. Are we switching seats or not? She asked him little more firmly, applying pressure to her sentence, so he could understand she was serious and not in the mood of arguing. He stared at her for a second, then glanced back at the movie screen, as if debating whether her request was worth interrupting his film. Fine, he muttered, finally unbuckling his seatbelt with a slight huff. Standing up to let her pass. They carefully exchanged places, trying not to make too much contact in the cramped aisle. Once she was settled by the window, she looked outside, her eyes widening in awe as she took in the clouds floating below them. Beautiful. Jungkook gave her a sideways glance. Happy now? Very, she replied, gazing out the window. She could feel him watching her for a moment, before he finally turned back to his screen. The flight attendant returned shortly after, serving their meals. They both quietly ate. She was looking at Jungkook out of the corner of her eye, noticing how he occasionally glanced at her plate, almost like he was making sure that she was eating enough. Or he wanted her food. Do you know when we're landing? She asked, getting bored. In about 4 hours. He said, still not looking at her. So, we'll be landing directly in Mail? Or somewhere else first? She wanted to keep the conversation going. Jungkook took a sip of his soda, straight to Mail. From there, we'll have a short boat ride to the villa. Her fork paused midair, her eyebrows lifting slightly. A villa? You already booked one? Yes. Wanted everything to be ready when we arrived. Taking another sip of his drink, he replied, it's on one of the private islands. Oh. He glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, noting her reaction. Is that an issue? Not really. I was just surprised you booked everything. Jungkook didn't want to leave anything at the last minute. And speaking of that, you should rest after the meal. The first day there will be busy. Busy? Jungkook, we're going for a few planned activities. Some sightseeing, maybe dinner at one of the local restaurants. I arranged a few things, but you can let me know if rather skip something. She nodded slowly, her fingers tapping lightly on her tray. I'm okay with that. Sounds good. But her grip on the armrest tightened a little as the plane shuddered again, this time with a stronger wave. She wasn't exactly afraid of heights, or at least she hadn't thought so until now. But this turbulence was testing her limits. She distracted herself well enough in this long flight, napping earlier and burying herself in movies, but now there was nothing to take her mind off these stronger bumps. What's happening? she asked looking at Jungkook who was sitting really calmly. He opened his mouth, but the voice from the intercom interrupted him. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some turbulence due to weather conditions. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened securely. We will do our best to. Are we going to die? He pursed his lips together before clearing his throat as if he was trying not to laugh. No. We aren't. She huffed, giving him a small glare, but another heavy jolt made her inhale sharply, and without realizing it, her hand reached over, gripping his arm tightly. Her fingers curled around his sleeve, and she leaned closer. Are you sure? Because it feels like we're not going to make it alive. He glanced down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. Pretty sure, he said dryly, though he didn't pull away. This is normal turbulence. Calm down. But she didn't loosen her hold, muttering curses under her breath. It annoyed her how calm he was, sitting there. YN, how are you so calm? He shifted slightly, adjusting in his seat, and she was now holding onto his arm more comfortably. Turbulence isn't dangerous. Just breathe. She huffed, clinging to him but gasped, squeezing his arm even harder when she had felt stronger jolt. Great, my life depends on this plane and the pilot's good mood. Jungkook didn't reply to her, she kept her eyes closed, holding on to him until it began to settle down. Great, that was a good start of their honeymoon. It wasn't long before they pulled up to a private resort, where they were quickly escorted to their villa on the water. Jungkook unlocked the door, holding it open for YN. She walked in, her eyes widening. Immediately. Holy, this is insane, she whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the spacious room with the floor-to-ceiling windows that led directly out onto a private deck, complete with a view of the sparkling beach. I mean, I knew it'd be nice, but this, she glanced around, clearly impressed. I didn't know it'd be this nice. He set both of their luggage aside, watching her reaction. Good enough for you? YN, it's perfect. Didn't expect you to have such good taste, honestly. He raised an eyebrow. You thought I'd settle for anything less? Oh, right, she replied, recalling his work. I almost forgot Mr. Architect here would only pick the best. He didn't respond, his gaze steady as he looked around the villa. Yes, he was an architect, and choosing spaces like these came naturally to him. He knew exactly how to recognize the details that would make an impression, and he took a quiet pride in picking the perfect place for them. He placed his suitcase on bed, unzipping it. Pulling out a neatly folded shirt and a fresh pair of pants, setting them aside. Jungkook, don't forget to call Mom. She specifically asked us to check in once we arrived. YN paused, glancing over at him. Of course. I'll call her in a minute. And then he was walking towards the bathroom to take a quick shower after hours-long flight. Stepping out of the bathroom, fresh from his shower, a towel wrapped around his neck, the hair slightly damp. His gaze fell on YN, who had her back turned to him, phone pressed to her ear. He could tell immediately that she was talking to his mother from the warm, relaxed tone in her voice, a tone she didn't often use around him. YN chuckled at something, her hand resting casually on her hip. Yes, Mom, everything's beautiful here. You were right, the view is amazing. YN, okay, we'll take care of ourselves. I'll tell him. She smiled, adding a final, goodbye, before hanging up. She turned around, her eyes met his, a bit surprised to find him standing there. She lowered her phone, slipping it into her pocket. Oh, you're out, she said, giving him a once-over before quickly looking away, an almost flustered look crossing her face as she took in his damp, freshly showered form. He raised an eyebrow, had a nice chat. She cleared her throat. Your mom just wanted to make sure we arrived in one piece. She worries too much. He let out a small sigh. Yeah, she does. That's why I told you to call her. Otherwise, she'd probably make a fuss, and then Dad would call to scold me for not keeping her updated. YN narrowed her eyes, guess you're still a mama's boy after all. He shot her a mildly annoyed look but didn't argue. She loved pushing his buttons, and she was pretty good at it too. Over the past 2 months, she found every small way to get a reaction out of him, whether with comments or her quick comebacks. But he already had gotten used to it, choosing to keep his responses cool and letting her have her say. Still, 2 times they did got an argument, the first time was just after their wedding. Jungkook planned a family dinner. He didn't thought to check with her schedule, assuming she'd be available. And when he told her the same day she was annoyed utterly. She actually confronted him that she had busy day ahead and how he can't make decision by himself without including her. Jungkook did know it was his mistake, but his pride came in way and they had full-blown argument. Later they eventually made up. The second argument was just 2 weeks ago. It was her fault this time. Their schedules rarely matched because of their work, and they agreed to visit his parents the previous night, the same day his parents told them they should go to honeymoon. She showed after an hour, which led to another argument. Though she opened up about how hard it was for her to adapt to their schedules and routines, that she was used to handling things her own way. Anyways, he said, go get ready. Take a shower, then we'll head out. Alright, Jungkook, are you hungry? We can order room service if you want. She shrugged. I'm not, but if you're hungry, you can get something. I want to explore. First. Jungkook, fine, but hurry up, don't take too long like last time. I don't even take that much time. Jungkook, you do. I do not. Jungkook, yes, you do. And stop bickering like a child. You're the one who started it. Jungkook, I just stated the fact, you just have to accept it. Why would I even accept when it's not true? Jungkook, see? You're already making us late. He pointed it out, watching her roll her eyes before heading to the bathroom. Muttering something under her breath which he couldn't quite get it. Their first few days in the Maldives were packed, just like he planned. On the first day, they started with a visit to a sandbank just a short boat ride away. Jungkook arranged a private lunch. There was endless views of the turquoise ocean. Loved the ocean, couldn't hide her excitement as she dipped her toes into the warm, shallow waters. Are you going to join me? She asked that time, as she glanced over her shoulder to see him standing on the sand, taking a few photos. Jungkook, I'll be there in a minute. Just getting a few pictures. Fine, take all the photos you want. I'll just enjoy this by myself. She chuckled, wading further into the water. He lowered the camera, watching her as she let the water swirl around her ankles. She was happy. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly, but when she looked back at him, he quickly turned his attention back to the camera, pretending to take pictures of water, as if he wasn't just watching her. The second day they explored a small local market in the nearby town. Oh, look at these, she said, stopping by a stall selling colorful scarves and beachwear. She held up a lightweight scarf. Isn't this pretty? He gave it a glance and nodded. It'd look good on you. She paused, slightly surprised. You think so? Jungkook, yeah, the color suits you. He said it nonchalantly like it was no big deal. Like he didn't just complimented her. I'll get it then. Good to know you're not completely blind to fashion. He narrowed his eyes, letting her enjoy the moment. They continued walking, stopping occasionally. He was mostly quiet. They even took boat tour the same day, and the third day they went underwater restaurant. Jungkook felt the satisfaction seeing her so taken by everything he arranged. And the places he'd take her to, she was just in awe. Of course noticed it too. She felt like he was watching her more than his scenery around them. It did make her flustered every time she caught his gaze. On their fourth day, things were slower. Because now they needed to pack for their early flight the next morning, which was scheduled for 6 a.m. Sighed, scrolling through her phone laying on the bed. She eventually got up, glancing out the window at the beach below. Tourists were everywhere across the sand, playing in the water or lounging under the sun. Watching them sparked an idea. She turned back toward Jungkook, who was busy with his mobile. Jungkook, let's go outside. We can join everyone on the beach. Look how they all are having fun. I'm working right now, If you want to go, go ahead. He barely looked up from his phone, still typing something quickly. She raised an eyebrow, annoyed. You're actually working? Jungkook, we're supposed to be on vacation. He sighed, glancing up at her. I got a message from my secretary. There's a file I need to look over. Unbelievable. You're choosing to work? You really can't just leave it for one day. Jungkook, this is important, and it won't take long. Right, of course, she scoffed. So much for a honeymoon. She spun on her heel and stormed into the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. Gripping the sink as she glared at her reflection. Jungkook was impossible to figure out. Just when she thought she was starting to understand him, he'd do something like this, choosing work over spending time with her, even during their honeymoon. Jungkook was confusing, to say the least. Sometimes, she felt he was attentive, like he cared. And then sometimes he start to push her buttons like an annoying child. She'd throw his attitude back at him, poking and teasing in a way that almost felt childish. But he did the same to her, which made it even harder to tell what he was actually feeling. They were both 26, but sometimes, it felt like they were acting like kids, constantly testing each other's patience. Until one of them snapped. She brushed her hair out of her face and decided she wasn't going to spend her last day in the Maldives stewing over her husband's confusing behavior. If he wanted to work, fine. She could go out and enjoy herself, with or without him. An evil idea popped in her head. Walking out of the bathroom, Wyan was deciding whether she should take the scarf or not. Wrapping it around her neck, glancing at herself in the mirror with a satisfied nod. The scarf was a soft, matching the beach vibe, but she knew it was probably pointless with the sun glaring so brightly outside. After a quick glance in the mirror, she began to unwrap it, deciding the heat would make her regret wearing it. Suddenly a loud cough broke her focus. She didn't even have to look back to know who it was, nor why he was reacting like that. She could practically feel his eyes burning holes into her reflection. But she kept looking at herself, pretending not to notice. Where the hell are the rest of your clothes? His voice sounded half in disbelief, half. Was that irritation? She turned, hands on her hips, giving him a pointed look. What does that mean? He crossed his arms, his eyes traveling from her face down to the outfit she had on. Wyan, there's no way you're going out wearing that. She scowled at him, and why not? Her swimsuit was a sleek, deep teal one-piece with a low back, thin straps, and high-cut legs that showed off her figure. The fabric hugged her curves just right, and while it was certainly revealing, it was nothing scandalous, especially not here, where everyone wore similar beachwear. Wyan, it's a swimsuit. And, by the way, everyone's wearing stuff like this. It's called beachwear, Jungkook. But he didn't seem to be listening. His eyes were narrowed. You're not going out there like that. That's final. Wyan, are you serious right now? Everyone else is wearing this around here. Jungkook, everyone else can wear whatever they want. But you, maybe you could. I don't know, put on a cover-up or something, but Wyan, I'm not changing into anything just because you said it. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly frustrated. His eyes kept darting to the floor, and then back to her. Listen here. Just change. You don't get it. She crossed her arms, what don't I get? She could see his face hardening, even though he was trying to keep his cool, but his eyes kept betraying him. Jungkook, why don't you just listen to me one time? Will it make you happy that people out there would stare at you? Was he jealous? Possessive? Wyan looked at him in disbelief, I'm here to enjoy myself. And everyone wearing swimsuit. You are making it a big deal. Jungkook, Wyan dash. Wyan, if you have that much problem that people will stare at me, why don't you come outside with me? She challenged him, and her plans was working. Will he finally come out with her? Jungkook inhaled, closing his eyes, like gathering his thoughts around before he spoke. Okay, fine, do whatever you want. And leaned back on bed and focused back on his phone. Wyan's mouth dropped open, her expectations just flowed in the water. Glad to know I have your permission now, hubby, she muttered sarcastically, before heading to the door. She felt his eyes on her back as she left. But she didn't look back. Wyan laughed as she jumped to hit the ball, splashing water as it sailed over to the other side. A group of other beachgoers invited her to join their game, and she might have made new friends. They were all so sweet. You've got a great spike, one of the girls praised, grinning as she high-fived Wyan. Thanks, she replied with a laugh. The game went on, the warm sun on her skin and cool splashes around her making her feel free from everything that happened back at the villa. Another guy on her team threw the ball to her. Think you can catch this one? Watch me, she called, diving forward as the ball flew toward her. She missed it by just an inch, but they all laughed, clapping and cheering anyway. So you and your husband here for your honeymoon? The girl asked. Wyan, I thought so, but feel like he's married to his phone right now. They chuckled, and Mia gave a knowing look as she tossed the ball back to Jake. For a good 15 minutes, they kept the game going, laughing and cheering each other on. She was so lost in the game that it took a moment before her gaze drifted back toward the shore. Her eyes locked on someone near the villa, and she almost choked on her own breath. Jungkook was shrugging out of his shirt. Her eyes widened, her heart almost blinked as he casually tossed the shirt aside, revealing lean, sculpted muscles she hadn't quite imagined before. His skin glowed under the sunlight. She nearly forgot to breathe. She knew he worked out, but seeing him like this, shirtless, only wearing dark swim shorts that hung low on his hips, was entirely different. Her gaze stayed on his toned arms, his abs, and how effortlessly confident that he looked. And she wasn't the only one noticing. Around her, a few of the girls in the group had also paused mid-game. She swore she even heard a couple of gasps. She glanced back at them, catching one girl with her mouth slightly open. Oh no. That wasn't supposed to happen. She quickly looked away, suddenly feeling flustered, her cheeks warm. She hadn't expected him to actually come down here, let alone to draw this much attention. She thought he would stay back, focused on his work. But here he was, all eyes on him, and it was obvious why. Whose man is that? Because goddamn. My husband. YN gritted out. Why the hell she was feeling possessive and jealous? Wow. Lucky you. YN forced a laugh, trying to shrug it off. Just focus on the game, she told herself, willing her heartbeat to calm down. It's just Jungkook. Your annoying, workaholic husband. YN. Pass it over here. Snapping out of her thoughts, she quickly passed the ball, watching it sail across. But she felt something, a prickling on the back of her neck. Like he was watching, and she had the urge to look in his direction, maybe a peek. Just for a second, and then she will look away. And she did look in his direction. And there he was, sprawled out on one of the large beach swings, his long frame stretched out on a towel, the drink in hand. His gaze was fixed on her, dark eyes as he watched her from under his lashes, looking almost relaxed. He took a sip, his gaze never leaving her, and she suddenly forgot to breathe. When did my husband become this hot? She thought, feeling her cheeks flush. She'd always thought his mouth, sharp, witty, and always getting on her nerves, was enough to ruin any attraction. But now, watching him like this, she had to admit, he looked good. Maybe too good. She forced herself to look away, hoping no one saw her flustered reaction. But just as she had managed to ground herself, she saw him shift, glancing towards something to his right, and she followed his gaze. There was a girl in a vibrant bikini, leaning against the swing with a smile. She looked beautiful, and she was saying something to him. Of course, she thought, rolling her eyes, trying to shake off the prick of annoyance that settled in her chest. Her gaze hardened, and she was scowling slightly. It's only fitting that the first time he comes out here, he gets attention right away. YN bit her lips, forcing her eyes back on the game. But when she looked back after sometimes she was still standing there. But Jungkook was not laying down anymore, he was standing a little opposite side of swing. She finally had enough. So much for being busy, she thought, scowling as she waded out of the water. Taking steps a little too fast as she made her way over to him, the sand sticking to her damp feet. She didn't bother to hide her annoyance as she grabbed the towel lying beside him, ignoring the startled look the girl gave her. YN shot her a pointed glare, making her intentions more than clear. The girl was clearly flirting, giggling at whatever Jungkook was saying and twirling a strand out of her hair between her fingers. Jungkook turned towards her and smile formed on his lips. He reached out, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her close, pressing her damp back against his chest. She sucked in a quick breath. And here she is, my wife, he said, clearly smiling widely. He didn't seem to care at all that she was still wet, his hand resting possessively on her hip as he held her in place. The girl's smile faltered little, her eyes darting between them. Oh, so you actually have a wife, she muttered, she looked embarrassed. Jungkook, that's what I was trying to tell you. And we are here on our honeymoon, right, sweetheart? Her heart did skip a beat at that. But seeing the girl expression, she felt satisfied. Yeah, we are, as she said, and the girl mumbled something under her breath before turning around, joining her friends. As soon as the girl was out of sight, she wiggled in his arms. So, you're not too busy to chat with random girls, huh? Jungkook chuckled softly, entirely unbothered. Jealous. She scoffed, rolling her eyes with an exaggerated sigh. Please. She tried to pull away, but his arm only tightened around her waist, holding her firmly against him. Let go, Jungkook, she muttered, twisting slightly, but he only held her tighter, enjoying every bit of her frustration. She could almost feel his smirk against her skin. Why should I? He murmured close to her ear. You seemed pretty eager to be by my side just a minute ago. YN, don't get any ideas. I was just here to take towel. Jungkook. Yeah. Sure, honey. I totally believe that, thought. Believe whatever you want. Like I care. Oh, you care, he said, chuckling softly. You wouldn't have stormed over here, practically. Glaring daggers at her if you didn't. Like I said, thought Jungkook, stop fooling yourself. Your plan backfired, didn't it? She shot him an annoyed look. There was no plan, Jungkook. Really, he questioned, taking the towel from her hand, still not letting her go. He began drying her skin. She practically froze in his hold, the warmth of his hand pressing the towel to her shoulder, making her heartbeat quicken. Jungkook, you wanted me here, and now here I am. What are you angry about? She scoffed. Yeah. Well, I didn't tell you to strip down and flirt with every girl on the beach. Jungkook, I wasn't flirting. Why would I need to when I already have a wife? His words made her pulse race. That's a funny way to act like a husband. Do you even have the right to be this angry, though? He said, clicking his tongue, because I seem to remember you ignoring what I said about this. Her cheeks warmed as his eyes roamed over her figure. It was funny, there were plenty of people around who might look, but somehow only his gaze seemed to make her feel this way. Her heart raced, her skin prickling under his attention. I did not, Jungkook, don't you get it, YN? The reason I told you to cover up, it's because I don't like other people looking at what's mine. His eyes locked with hers. Yes, I'm the jealous type of man. I don't want anyone else's eyes on you, I trust you. But that doesn't change how I feel about the rest of them, about anyone else looking at you the way I do. That's only my right. She swallowed, his words sinking in her every vein of her body. Jungkook, and for the record. I don't care about anyone else here. You are my wife. You're the only one for me. I took my shirt off, to give you a taste of how it feels to see other people looking at what's yours. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks as he wrapped the towel around her. YN, then why did I feel like you didn't like me? Suddenly you are speaking so boldly, why did you make me feel like you can't tolerate my presence? If only you knew how much I like you, you might just run away. He gave a small, almost nervous laugh, his eyes flicking away for a second before meeting hers again. And that's the last thing I want. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable or put any pressure on you. I could tell that, well, this marriage wasn't exactly your dream come true.
He paused. So, even if it means we're just bickering all the time, I'd rather have that. At least it gets us talking. I can handle that if it means I get to be around you. YN raised an eyebrow. So, you'd rather just bicker with me than actually tell me how do you feel?
Jungkook cleared his throat, a small, guilty smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Yeah, I guess so. She scoffed. And you call me childish. You're the real child here. He leaned in closer. Oh, trust me. I can be all kinds of grown up when I need to be, but something tells me you might not be ready for that. Her eyes widened a little, her cheeks flushing. He let out a low chuckle. What's with the face? Already red? YN, please, it's the sun. Thanks for the compliment, he grinned, sliding his shirt back on, the fabric clinging to his toned frame. She grumbled under her breath, her cheeks flushing further at his teasing. I can't deal with you right now, she mumbled, running inside, eager to escape the heat of his gaze and the warmth flooding her cheeks. He laughed, as he followed her inside. Well, isn't the perfect honeymoon?